The Cleveland Cavaliers select Evan Mobley.
Has been a historical franchise in this league for years.
We have a trade to announce. The Boston Celtics select Jason Tatum.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the NBA Front Office Show. We've got a lot to break down today. Plus, we're going to give you our top 3 teams to watch heading into the trade deadline. Some news to get into first, though. Keith Smith joining me at Keith Smith NBA over on Twitter. Keith, I'm getting excited. Klay Thompson looks like he's coming back on Sunday. I'm ready for it. The Warriors have been great without him, but I can't wait to see Klay finally get back out on the floor.
Yeah, and I think it's really cool, too, that there's not like this ton of pressure for him to come back and save the season or anything like that. So that should give him the time he needs to ramp back up. As you said, they've been great. So they're going to add another, presumably he hasn't lost any of his shooting touch. That's usually not something that goes for guys. And then we'll see, what he looks like as a defender. Previously, he was an all defensive level kind of guy in the past. But I mean, you're going to add him to Steph and Draymond, and Wiggins is playing well, and to get bench production out of a whole bunch of guys. I mean, this is just the rich getting richer here.
Yeah, I mean, he was one of the best wing defenders in the NBA. Sometimes, though, I mean, defense drops off pretty quick if you start to lose your athleticism. So if the injuries have sapped some of that athleticism from Klay, maybe we see a shift there, but he's still going to provide plenty of shooting. I don't know. What are you expecting from him right out of the gates? I'm assuming very limited minutes.
Yeah, my guess is probably somewhere in the 15 to 20 minute range, probably a couple stints each half, and then that'll work up as the season goes along. And my guess is just get some touches, do what he does. I mean, this guy once scored like 60 points or whatever with like 4 dribbles or some absurd number. So my guess is he'll still do that, and then they'll work him in. He's probably not, if remember at the height of their powers, they would play him on the opposing point guard quite often, and would shift Steph off ball, and that additional size on those point guards, especially guys like Chris Paul and the like, gave those guys a lot of trouble over the years. My guess is they don't do a lot of that. He probably just comes in and defends another wing alongside Wiggins. I do think he probably starts right away. That would be my guess. That can also be a little bit easier to control minutes that way. If a guy starts, because you're not having to work him in based on game flow. But we'll see, what it looks like. But yeah, it sounds like Sunday's the day, and we'll start figuring that out.
I also think in terms of warm-ups, sometimes it's easier for players who are coming back from injuries to warm up and get right into a game rather than warm up, sit down on the bench, you're there for 15 minutes or whatever, then you get into the game, then you cool off again. It's that back and forth can be a little bit more of a challenge. So I agree. I think starting him would make sense. And like you said, the great thing about the Warriors this season is they've been so good that let's say he's struggling at first or something like that. They've got a lot of other guys that they can lean on that are used to taking on that burden. You mentioned Andrew Wiggins. He's been very good. Gary Payton II has stepped up for them. They've got a number of these role guys that have stepped up and done things for them. Jordan Poole, we could talk about Otto Porter Jr. So even if Klay doesn't quite have the ability to do heavy lifting right now, that's okay. That's okay. He can work with training wheels on for the next month or more as he gets reacclimated to playing NBA basketball games.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely spot on. It's almost an ideal situation here. And the good thing, too, is we're talking about it's early January. So he's going to have 3 full months of NBA action to kind of get up to speed before the playoffs even start. So they're a title contender, and now they're getting one. And this is almost like one of those, when we talk about these all the time, this is like a trade deadline acquisition for the Warriors, but it's one where they get a guy without having to give anything up at all. Now that can be huge to help lift a team. I was gonna say from good to great, but they're already pretty great.
You're right.
So it's I don't know, great to favorite or something like that. So we'll see. But yeah, I mean they look like they're ready to take off.
And a guy that you don't even have to teach the system to, because he already knows it, unlike a trade deadline acquisition. Last night the Warriors took on the Miami Heat, and the Warriors saw Steph Curry shoot 3 for 17, and they still won 115-108. In large part because all the other guys picked it up.
Sorry if I can. Yeah, you're mentioning all the dead. Sorry, I stepped on your point.
No, you're fine.
But yeah, it's it's that's scary that they still put up 115 points and not rolled because Miami was in it for most of the game, but still get a victory over another good team when Steph doesn't even play well. Like that's what to me says, man, this team is ready, for a big playoff run.
I mean, it should be mentioned that it's Miami, right? I mean, they were missing a number of players and then had Jimmy Butler go down during the game. Now, it wasn't like Butler didn't play. He played 28 minutes, had 22 points, 7 of 14 shooting. He made an impact on the game, but did suffer an ankle injury. But still, even though the Heat were depleted, still, it is impressive that you can have Steph have such a poor game shooting-wise and still get the win because you've got all these other guys that can step up and kind of fill that role. I mean, Jordan Poole had 32 points. Like, how ridiculous is that to have, Steph's not playing well? Okay, no big deal, because Jordan Poole's going to come off the bench and drop 32 for us.
Yeah, exactly. And you've got in a situation there with the Warriors, too, where the last couple years, now, what was it, 2 years ago, Steph missed almost the entirety of the season. So that really kind of ruined things. And, of course, they didn't have Klay all year. But then it was those other guys just weren't ready for that. So I really think those kind of 2 years of the one really awful year where it was press all these guys, got all the minutes that they could possibly handle, as a lot of them like Poole as a rookie and some of those other guys. And then last year, those guys continue to play quite a bit. That's now paying off for the Warriors here this year because, as we said, Jordan Poole, that was our guy. Remember, we loved him going back to the preseason. I think we were both high on him maybe as sixth man of the year had he not started so much. So now that's dropped off, I think, a little bit. I think others have come forward in that role, but still, still a really good player. And he's probably the prime example of a guy who took advantage of those opportunities to learn and grow on the fly. And now that the team is back to being a title contender, now he's a key contributor off their bench.
Yeah. Yep. Jimmy Butler, sprained ankle, had issues putting any weight on it coming off the floor. That could be a big deal from Miami. Miami currently sitting in the 4 seed in the Eastern Conference, have the Cavs behind them, game and a half back of the Miami Heat. Miami's dealt with a lot of players being out now. What does this mean, assuming that they are going to be missing Jimmy Butler for a bit here? Yeah,
this is tough, and this is part of why I didn't love Miami as a regular season team. They just don't have a lot of depth. They're now kind of similar-ish to the Warriors, except they're not doing it in a completely bottom-out scenario. Some of these guys are stepping forward and getting some good, valuable minutes. Guys like Omer, you're at 7. Now they've got a valuable backup big man, Max Strus. When he has played, has stepped up. Gabe Vincent, when he's been in there, has stepped up. But at some point, you hit a kind of a point of no return with these injuries. Now, the good thing is, none of them are season ending. They should all be back eventually, but it's probably going to mean a couple rough weeks, especially if Butler needs to miss any time. And it didn't look good when he went down. Now, Eric Spoelstra said post-game Jimmy Butler will say he's fine and that he's ready to go. But, that's probably just Jimmy Butler being tough.
That's Jimmy Butler being Jimmy Butler. He could be missing a limb and he'd be doing the Monty Python. It's just a scratch.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because my thing is you don't get helped off the court and then immediately walk back on generally. So so we'll see where that goes with him.
Speaking of the Cleveland Cavaliers, who are again a game and a half behind the Miami Heat, did just trade for Rajon Rondo. We can finish off that trade. Well, I guess let's just mention it now. The Knicks did decide to go ahead and waive Valentine, so he's out. He'll be a free agent now. Yeah. We'll see if a team picks up Denzel Valentine or not. But the Cavs also lost Isaac Okoro now to an elbow injury, out 2 to 3 weeks. And again, this is a Cavs team that was just scrambling to try to replace Ricky Rubio, and they're getting Rajon Rondo to do that. And now you're going to be missing Isaac Okoro as well. And as I just mentioned, Jimmy Butler missing for the Miami Heat. It seemed like maybe there was an opportunity here perhaps for the Cavs to move up in the standings and maybe even get home court advantage. Obviously we're a ways away from locking in these standings, but still, now they suffer another injury themselves though. So it's got to be frustrating at this point for the Cavs they've had such a bright season to now getting hit with all these injuries.
Yeah, 2-3 weeks for Okoro that he's going to be down. So better prognosis than the Rubio and Colin Sexton,
Sure.
who both look like they'll miss the rest of the season. But Okoro's their only real kind of wing-ish player on this roster outside of Jetty Osman.
Yeah.
And that's tough because you're going to have to kind of continue to patchwork this thing as you go forward here. They'll get Darius Garland back. It sounds like, within the next couple of days as he'll come back out of the health and safety protocols. As you said, they have Rondo. Rondo will come in now as Garland's backup. But those aren't two guys you really can play together. I mean, maybe they will just because they kind of have to.
It's not ideal.
But this puts, for at least the next couple of weeks, puts a lot of pressure on guys like Lamar Stevens, who's really more of a 3 than he is a 2. And then Dylan Windler, who's been unable to stay healthy for most of his career. The first 3 years of hit, or 2.5 years now. I guess he's missed considerable time, but then they've got RJ Nembhard on a 2-way. So you're going to see some names you probably aren't overly familiar with for the Cavs, just because they're going to need those guys. It makes me wonder. We've said over and over again, a guy like Karis LeVert makes a lot of sense for this team. Now, do you get LeVert because he kind of fills almost 2 roles? He could be that starting wing alongside Garland, and also then shift over and be, in effect, the backup point guard. And if not LeVert, somebody like that. I think if Okoro. It sounds like 2-3 weeks, so he'll be back, before the end of January, at least probably about 3 weeks or so ahead of the trade deadline. But it's a spot where you can use some depth anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Now the Cavs have lost 4 of their last 6 games. They're in a bit of a skid, but I'll tell you what, I'm excited for tonight. It's going to be Cavs against Grizzlies, 2 of the young teams in the NBA that have really made waves this season, and Darius Garland is not on the injury report anymore, so should be back in action tonight to take on Ja Morant. This is going to be a great matchup. I'm excited for this one.
And the Grizzlies are coming off stomping the Nets last night in Brooklyn. That's the only downside for them. They're coming in on a back-to-back with travel, but I mean, they went in and handled Brooklyn with ease. If you look at the final score, it probably looks closer than you're probably like, oh, that's not that bad, but it wasn't as close as that final score looks. I mean, they really hammered that team and really took care of them with very little problem. They're in Brooklyn, especially led by Ja, who was great once again. Player of the week, Ja Morant.
I wish, and yes, he is player of the week, which is, I mean, he's been absolutely phenomenal. I wish there was a way to remove that from the schedule. The back-to-back with travel. It's so crazy because you finish a game. Just think, really. I mean, I'm someone who doesn't travel well in terms of if I travel, if I'm on like a red-eye flight, I don't sleep. I can't sleep on planes. So wherever I wind up, I'm exhausted the entire next day. Well, these guys travel all night. And then they have to play another NBA game less than 24 hours after completing one. Like, the toll on the body has got to be immense. And so you're getting a lower quality of basketball as a result of that. And I know the schedule is really tough, but I would love if there was some way to prevent that from happening, because that's tough on teams, particularly older teams. The older teams really struggle with situations like that. I know it's been a thing for years, but back-to-back on the road with travel where you're traveling all night, that's rough.
Speaking of back-to-back with travel, did you see what happened to the Nets?
I saw your tweet.
With that rescheduled game.
Insane.
Oh, man, that is rough. They are. So in case anybody didn't see it, what happened with, if we go back, we remember the Nets had a handful of games wiped out, and a couple of them were when they were on the West Coast, or I guess only one was a West Coast game. But what they're going to do now is this Sunday, they're going to play, their game was moved up from an evening game to an afternoon game. They're going to play the Spurs at noon this Sunday in Brooklyn. Then Monday night at 10 p.m., they're going to play 10 p.m. Eastern time. They're going to play the Portland Trailblazers. So that is one of the further trips you can make in the NBA, because it's Brooklyn to Portland, and they've got to do it on a back-to-back. Now, they do have the benefit of getting the game with San Antonio done, but that's not something the NBA does. You never go East Coast to West Coast, West Coast to East Coast, and play back-to-back games. You do those within the same. Generally, it's within the same time zone. Maybe it might be an hour shift here and there. That especially out on the West with Phoenix and Denver and those teams. But it's in Utah as well. But with yeah, playing a home game at noon on a Sunday, headed to Portland to play a road game. And then they have to go from there. They fly back to Chicago to play on Wednesday, and then a back-to-back back home in Brooklyn on Thursday. So it's 4 games in 5 days. We're going east, west, travel date, central, and then back east again. So just a rough run here for the Nets coming.
Thank goodness they've got Kyrie back for those road games. I think they're absolutely going to need him because they're going to be some tired legs there. I mean, this would be like if the NFL scheduled a team for Monday Night Football and Thursday Night Football in the same week. Yeah, that's pretty much what we're seeing here.
Close to that, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, let's get into. Oh, you know what? We mentioned this. We talked about this a little bit right before we came on the air. Jerami Grant. The Pistons, not a surprise at all. We know a lot of teams in the NBA are looking for wings right now. That's what's in demand. But they've been getting a lot of calls on Jerami Grant right now. Do the Pistons make a move? He was so excited about going to the Pistons, what that meant for him. But do you see them actually moving on?
Yeah, I think they could. I think that means a lot, but it only means a lot if the team is winning.
Yeah.
They're starting that process of the climb upwards. And then the deeper you get into the contract, it starts to mean less as well. Now my big pushback last season rather was when people were throwing Jerami Grant in there. I was like, boy, that's really, kind of spitting in the guy's face of like, yeah, we're going to turn right around and trade you. Like, that's not, you don't do that.
The Blake Griffin with the Clippers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's tough. Now, the Griffin one, even that's a little different because,
sure.
You got a full max deal. He'd been with LA for years and years. But yeah, I do think it's more likely than not that the Pistons are open to moving him. Whether they do or not, that depends. I think it's interesting because Jerami Grant's kind of a guy you look at and you say, man, the numbers are pretty good. Then you dig into him a little bit more and the efficiency's not so good. There's a lot of turnovers there, a lot of missed shots. Then you dig a little deeper and you're like, well, look at who he's played with over the last season and a half. That's also not all that great. And you start to envision put him back in Denver type role where he's, your 4th best guy and playing off some other guys. You can start to really build it up to, all right, I get where we're going with this. So my guess is they really explored. And if a team really says, yeah, Jerami Grant, we think he puts us over the top to contend, then I think Detroit probably does, say, all right, let's, do this. And Cade Cunningham and crew, that's who we're building around, and off we go.
When you're being asked to be the guy on a bad team, and that's maybe a little bit above what you are as a basketball player, it's hard to have solid efficiency in that type of situation.
Really hard.
So I do think if he went back to a better team, then his efficiency is going to go up because his shot quality is going to go up. Right now you see a lot of, and I know he's hurt right now, but in general, the Pistons will get into troubled situations, then, low in the shot clock, and then, well, okay, here, Jerami Grant, you're our guy. Make something happen. Yep. Those are efficiency killers. But Jerami Grant contractually, 20
related to that. It's always, sorry, just one thing. And I always think it's funny. There's a thing out there where there's a strong belief that Michael Jordan in his career probably would have shot 5 to 10, probably closer to 5 percentage points better on his career average, and obviously then per season, if he didn't have to take all those bailout shots at the end of the shot clock, at the end of quarter, at the end of game, where it's like, hey, you got to make something happen for us. There was that same kind of thing existed with Kobe Bryant as well. For years, especially after the post Shaq era, it was, all right, Kobe, go make it happen, and that's how it goes. I mean, the way I see it now with Jason Tatum on the Celtics, they generally tend to throw him the ball when you get under about 10 seconds in the shot clock, and it's make something happen here for us. And it can be tough on those guys. Now the best ones make it happen more often than not, and they move along. But yeah, it really does ding up a guy's efficiency pretty badly.
So contractually, Jerami Grant, $20 million this season, pretty reasonable for a 27-year-old wing that is, pretty productive. $20.9 million next season. Heard some rumblings, though, that he might want an extension and somewhere close to a max if he's traded somewhere. What's the scenario with that in terms of getting an extension done? Let's say they do trade him. What is the incoming team looking at if they are expecting to keep him long term?
Yeah, so a couple pieces with that. One, he's not even eligible to sign an extension yet. You have to be 2 years after you sign the initial deal, so
Okay.
that would be sometime next year. But the reality is, I don't know that any teams, no one's going to a max for him.
Sure.
He's just not a max player. He would have to really go somewhere and just dominate on a good team, lead a big playoff run, and to get to those numbers. But what you could see is someone say, all right, with where the cap's going to go and what you can do for us, yeah, we can go 24, 25 million a year, and kind of that it's just below the max level. But you're talking for him now. He is what is he? He's a 7-year veteran, so you're talking he's getting into that second tier. So like you're talking a max deal for him would be, that's like $37 million a year.
That's pushing it. Yeah.
That's not, that's too much. But 24, 25, yeah, that seems reasonable. That's a bump up from where he is now. And that kind of gets you moving. Even with the cap rising, 37 million is too much.
He is in a spot, though, where he can influence his destination. Should the Pistons decide, okay, we're going to trade him, he's a free agent, not this offseason, but the following one. He can say, hey, Team X, I don't particularly want to go play for you. If you trade for me, I'll play for you. But just so you know, I'm going to leave in free agency. Right. And that can scare away teams. We've seen that.
Absolutely. I think if you're the acquiring team, you look at it as, hey, come in and let's see where it goes.
Yes.
Because they'll still have bird rights on him. They would be able to pay him more than anybody else could, assuming you're going all the way up to those crazy numbers, and we'll have to see. And that's one where his agent really needs to be doing a couple different things. You need to be looking at, all right, where are we going? What's your role going to be? What's your production going to look like? Plus, what's the cap environment going to look like in the summer of 2023 when he's a free agent? Because if you're talking 7-8 teams with cap space, Jerami Grant's probably going to be near the top of those lists for guys that are, teams and that are going to be looking at him for those guys. But if you're talking 4 or 5 teams with cap space, and maybe those teams are, have needs elsewhere, that becomes a little bit harder to make work.
Okay, let's before we get into our teams to keep an eye on, let's talk Ryan Arcidiacono. That's what we wanted to. Okay, so had a contract with the Knicks. And then the NBA said, no, you don't.
Yep.
What's going on here?
Yeah, so what happened was he signed one of those 10-day hardship deals with the Knicks. As we've seen, those are very common around the NBA right now. But 2 things happened here. One, we already talked about. The Knicks waived Wayne Selden to open a roster spot for Denzel Valentine. The league's more spot, we're good. But then they waive Valentine. So one, already it starts to be, you need to add a guy on a hardship when you just waived a player who's perfectly valid and could play for you. Right. So that's already one part of it. The other part was the Knicks got a couple guys back out of the health and safety protocols, Mitchell Robinson and Jericho Sims. So now they're both bigs, and Arcidiacono's a guard and all that stuff, but whatever. But from the hardship, it doesn't look at positions, right? Be the Denver Nuggets in the first part of the bubble and play Jokic at point guard and Bol as your 2 guard.
Right.
Move about your day. But what they're really looking at is it's just about bodies. You got to figure this out. So the league comes back and says you're not eligible for that hardship, and they void that contract. So Arcidiacono heads back to NBA free agency, back to the G League. Here's the twist, though. Tomorrow, January 5th, teams can start signing players to standard or regular 10-day contracts. Those open up on the 5th. So what we're going to see here is Arcidiacono is likely to just hang out today, and then he'll probably sign with the Knicks tomorrow on a regular 10-day, and then they'll bring him in, and he'll just slide into that open roster spot that they have open after the Valentine waiver. So that's probably how this is going to go down, and off we go. That'll be a regular 10-day that'll count against the tax, count against the cap, and all that stuff. But the Knicks are so far below like the tax. They're about 17 million below the tax, so it's not even a concern for them.
And what's a 10-day? Like it's like $90,000, something like that.
For Archie Diacono, yeah, pretty close, man. $95,930.
Okay. So it's not a major concern in terms of the tax or anything like that.
Nope.
Alrighty. Okay, let's get into our top 3 teams to watch heading into the trade deadline. See, a lot of this is very, very fluid, and we do have the trade deadline coming up here in February, and we know that this is the time of year when things really pick up. However, there's some teams that we need to keep an eye on in terms of, are they going to be a buyer? Are they going to be a seller? How motivated are they going to be to make a move? So we each came up with 3 teams that we're keeping an extra close eye on as we get closer to the trade deadline. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first, and I'm going to get, and we don't know each other's lists. So
That's right.
For me, the reality is I could give you a little note on all 30 teams,
right,
and why I'm, excited about them going into the deadline. I'm also going to say for me personally, I took the Pacers and Blazers off because I've talked about them kind of to the point of people are tired of it here. So I picked 3 different teams. So my first one, the Chicago Bulls.
Okay.
The Bulls are 25-10. They are now 2 games up on both the Nets and the Bucks. They've won 8 straight in the East. They're starting to close in on the Jazz, Suns, and Warriors just a little bit for the best record in the league. And the Bulls don't look like they're going anywhere anytime soon. They look pretty solid. And now, why I say that is they're maybe a piece or 2 away from you starting to look at them as like, man, this team's legit. And they could contend. The other thing why I have my eye on the Bulls is they have the ability to make kind of a big move without hurting their current production levels.
Okay.
Because you're not going to trade Lonzo. You're not going to trade Levine, Vooch, DeRozan, not Caruso. Those are kind of your key guys. Around those guys, though, this is some of their tradable salary that they could move. And then none of them individually is all that great, but you start stacking them together, they start to look pretty good. So I'm just going to kind of give them to you in alphabetical order here. Sure. But Troy Brown Jr., $5.2 million. Derek Jones Jr., $9.7 million. Kobe White, $5.8 million. And Patrick Williams, $7.4 million. And so I'll talk them in pieces. Brown and Jones combined, you're already at almost $15 million in outgoing salary. That's pretty good already for 2 guys that are kind of fringe rotation guys. They're in and out of the rotation. But if you add Williams or White, who are also value plays for an acquiring team as young players that at least have a couple more years left under contract, especially Williams. Now you've added not only matching salary, but you've added some value. They're a little shy on draft picks. That part is a little bit tricky for them to come up with. They got to get a little creative in the way they word those, because it would have to be, if we've delivered to Orlando and delivered to San Antonio, then we could give you this. But that's something you can do with creative language on those. But I would think, Williams is a guy I know a ton of teams like. And if you're the Bulls, I think you gotta look at it and say, do we want to try to live in 2 worlds where we're pretty good right now, but then we've got these young guys that can help us moving forward? Or do we really want to push in and go all in and go for it? We just talked about Jerami Grant. Another guy I think who would be great for them is Harrison Barnes.
Yes.
Both very easily acquirable.
Always Harrison Barnes every year.
Yeah, I know, right? And Harrison Barnes is going to be for 20 teams this year.
Yep.
But acquirable guys because of their numbers and their play and positional fit. Also important there in Chicago, because I feel like they need one more true power forward sized player to help them out. So I have them at the top of my list.
All right, let me add to it. The Atlanta Hawks. I've got the Hawks currently sitting in 12th in the Eastern Conference. Recently, some comments from Trae Young about how it hasn't been very fun playing basketball this season, and a big part of that is their defense. They're currently the 2nd ranked team in offensive rating and the 2nd to worst ranked team in defensive rating. They are giving up the 2nd most points per game in the entire Eastern Conference. So the Hawks seem to be primed to make a move, and you've got movable parts. So I talked about this earlier. A lot of teams in the NBA, they like wings, and the Hawks have, well, ironically, plenty of them. They've got plenty of wings that they can move. I mean, if they were to put Bogdan Bogdanović $18 million salary. If they were to put him on the market, there's going to be teams interested. Danilo Gallinari at $20.4 million. There's another contract that can get you to something pretty good. You've got some young guys too.
And the Gallo one is almost like a pseudo expiring.
That's right.
He's only guaranteed for $5 million for next year. So that's that's enough that you could call that a pseudo expiring deal.
And then you've got some guys, Kevin Huerter, who I imagine they're going to hang on to there, but Cam Reddish.
And Huerter tricky just because of the poison pill, because
right.
he's got the extension, so that makes him a little harder to move.
So they've got pieces that teams will be interested in should they decide to put them out on the market. They've got a surplus of wings, even with the DeAndre Hunter situation, everything going on there. So I think the Hawks are a team that are primed to make a move, and I think these Trae Young comments about how basketball hasn't been fun, that only pushes them closer to making something happen, because they have such high expectations after what we saw out of them last season. And it hasn't worked out this year, but with those kind of expectations on them, I would assume that they will make a move by the deadline. I'm going to be keeping a close eye on them to see if they have any kind of surge between now and then. But if they don't, you'd have to think that this team is going to need to make a move, get themselves into the playoffs, something to give them a little bit of a boost, get into the playoffs, and then hope to recapture some of the magic that they had last season.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to guess you said this too. Did you see this without seeing Travis Schlenk's comments, or have you seen those?
No, I didn't see Schlenk's comments.
Perfect. So they asked if he'd be active at the trade deadline. He was on a local Atlanta radio show. And he said, yeah, I don't think there's any reason for us not to be at this point. Clearly, we'd like to see the whole team on the floor together, but we also want to win. And right now, we're not doing that. I wouldn't be doing my job if I just stuck my head in the sand and said things are great. I don't think that's doing my job. So that is a good call for you. Also important to note, too, they have all their own draft picks.
Yep.
Going forward for first rounders, they've got some extra seconds. Get kind of a weird one that they're probably going to turn into 2 seconds from the Oklahoma City Thunder as well. So, and then that kind of got weird protections on it as well. But yeah, they're definitely set up to make a move for sure. All right, I'm going to give you my next team.
Okay.
The Minnesota Timberwolves.
I like it.
Why I picked the Wolves is I think this is a team that is very close to maybe locking in one of those top 6 spots if they can get their guys on the floor long enough here. But even if they don't pull that off, they can definitely put themselves in good position in the play-in, meaning being the 7th or 8th seed and only having to win a game to get into the postseason. And I think making the postseason is very important for this Minnesota team. And then they are just interesting enough that if they could get the right matchup, they could maybe make a little bit of noise in the playoffs too. I wouldn't pick them to be, if they were 7 or 8, I wouldn't pick them to be Golden State, Phoenix, or Utah. But if they could somehow get up to 5, which is not completely out of the realm of possibility with the way things look in the West right now, I think they could get there. They, again, too, in order for me to be on a list like this, you have to have the ability to make a trade. They've got some expiring salary in Taurean Prince and Patrick Beverley. If they really wanted to go that direction, that's $27 million in expiring salary. Or if they said, well, Beverley's too good for us, Malik Beasley's a guy you could add into a trade. So they can get well north of $20 million. They also have a lot of these kind of little deals that add up quickly. Guys like Josh Okogie, Jake Layman, Jared Vanderbilt, where you could start to stack salaries together. If you could find a team that could do, something where it's a 3-for-1 type of trade. Shocker, Jerami Grant, Harrison Barnes would be wonderful fits for the Wolves, because I do think they need a 4 that can kind of hold their own defensively, but they should be in on anything except scoring from a nominal 2 guard. They've got that covered between D'Angelo Russell and Anthony Edwards and Malik Beasley. That you're good on. But just about anything else they could really use outside of, obviously starting center. They don't need either, because you have Karl Anthony Towns. But I think the Wolves are an interesting team, and they should have looked, and I didn't, but I'll look right now. I think they have all their own picks as well. They do. They have all their own first rounders as well.
All right. I think that's a pretty good team to go with. And you know what? They compete, man. From seeing them a few times already this season, regardless of who's on the floor, that team competes hard. every single night. And
You don't need to tell me, man. They beat the Celtics
yeah,
pretty good the other day.
they beat up on the Lakers once. They almost beat the Lakers the other night without Karl Anthony Towns or D'Angelo Russell. That team plays hard. But chemistry is important, right? It's important that you are, even if you are a rebuilding team, it's important that you're instilling the right values in that team, that you've got the right pieces in place so that you are able to grow your young talent. And with that in mind, I'm looking at the Houston Rockets. I think not only is this a team that has motivation to move on from Eric Gordon, but now you've had these recent issues with Kevin Porter Jr. and Christian Wood. And so then you have to ask yourself the question, what do we want around Jalen Green? If he's going to be our foundation moving forward, are these the guys that we want around him? I'm not saying, maybe this is a blip on the radar for Christian Wood and then everything is fine after this. But Kevin Porter Jr. obviously has a history of these kinds of situations. So I feel like the Rockets have motivation not just to move on from Eric Gordon, but potentially to move on from a few of the young guys who maybe culturally aren't the pieces that they want moving forward. I think back to the Cavs with LeBron James, Ricky Davis way back in the day, deciding to make a move there. You want to make sure that you're surrounding your young guy. If it's going to be Jalen Green, if it's going to be Alperen Sengun, whoever it's going to be, that's going to be your main piece moving forward, you want to make sure that you're giving them, I sound like this is kindergarten, but like a nurturing environment to become the basketball players that you want them to be in. And so it's fair to question whether or not that's what you're providing with the current pieces that are on the team. And so even though we know they're playing for ping pong balls, I think there might be some motivation here to move some pieces and focus in on finding some high character guys to put in around your guys and Jalen Green and your other players.
Yeah, no, we talked about this with Wood and Porter yesterday.
Yep.
My opinion was I think Wood, nothing changed for Christian Wood with this. Everybody will look at that as, all right, it was a bad day. Let's move on. Porter, that one becomes a little bit different because you have to clearly really think about what you're doing there. And can he thrive with you? Do you have the right support system in place for him? But I think the other important thing that just using those two guys as the frame of reference for this is you have to look at what do we have behind them and are we trying to free up? And I think Alperen Sengun behind Christian Wood, big, right? Mm-hmm. Now we move on to him being our guy. A little bit less at the guard spot, but you've got Josh Christopher, another first-round pick, who's played some and has shown some flashes that you, I think, feel like, yeah, we could throw him in there instead of Porter and move along. They have Amar'e Brooks, who's a guy that they signed for a few years there, and then Garrison Matthews, who they just inked to a contract as well, can slide in and play there. So I like that idea because it's not like you're just giving up on young talent. You have guys to backfill. With there. All right. I'm going to give you my last one here. And this is by no means my last one. Like I said, I could give you all 30. But I think this team they've been the close, but not quite there for feels like a few years running now. I wonder if the Jazz really make an all-in move.
I was looking at them too.
I really do wonder now. We can insert the Danny Ainge was close jokes here if we want to, now that he's running things in Utah. But I really, as I look at that Jazz team, it just feels like, can you go through another full postseason run with the Gobert, Mitchell, Conley, Bogdanovich, O'Neal, Clarkson core, and Ingles, I should add in there as well, and then lose in the second round? Because right now, do you put them above Golden State or Phoenix? I don't. I think those two teams are both probably better. I think there are a couple other teams, including the Lakers, that could give the Jazz some problems in the first round potentially. So I really look at it and say, all right, now I could see them making the finals. I'm not saying that they couldn't get into the finals, but I look at it now. The tricky part for them is you got to send out one of that core group to do any kind of move that's going to be meaningful enough. There's been a lot of stuff out there that could be Joe Ingles at $13 million. Even some of the more respected people in the league have started to buzz a little bit about that, including Zach Lowe. Dropped it in one of his recent columns. And Zach doesn't do a lot of it. So when he does, it really perks me up. And I'm like, oh, what's he hearing here? What's going on there? So it would be unjazz like to make that kind of big move here. I don't even know what they would do it for, because that's the other hard thing is like, what does this team really need?
Yeah.
But if you had a team that where some unexpected guy came available and they took a big swing, it wouldn't surprise me if it ended up being Utah.
Here's the thing though with the Jazz, you have to be careful. They're number 5 in defensive rating and number 1 in offensive rating. That's championship caliber. That's championship caliber production right there. So you got to be careful that you don't go too crazy if you're going to make a move with them, because they're already very, very good. And I think you could make an argument that maybe they do just need to leave it. Like, I'm not saying that's what they should do, because we've seen what happens to them historically in the playoffs. They're great in the regular season. They run an offense that's really tough to defend. Come playoff time, when teams can lock in on just them instead of, oh, we're playing the Jazz in the second night of a back-to-back on a random Wednesday in February, right, where their offensive system really catches you. Come playoff time, teams lock into what they're doing. They tend to be able to figure it out, and then the Jazz wind up going home. So, number one, I guess, what piece is it that solves that specific problem that you can go trade for? And then number two, what does it do to your team chemistry? Because again, there's things that are working, and you can make an argument that they're already so good that they could win a championship as is. So you have to be very certain that whatever you do is the right move that solves that problem without rocking the boat too much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm glad you didn't go to, because I know you actually watch the games and know better.
Yes.
I'm glad you didn't go to and Rudy Gobert gets played off the floor, because that doesn't happen.
No.
People keep bringing that up. It happened several years ago against the Warriors when they were kind of at the peak level Warriors, and it was really only a couple games, and it was just the Jazz were at that point. It was like, okay, we're going down. Like, we got to try some stuff
right
here. That's the only time that's happened. Even when they fell to the Clippers, he was out there. Now, you could argue it caused them some problems, but I mean, are we going to hold it against them that Terrence Mann went bananas in a game and that kind of caused them to lose a series? That starts to get a little tough. Here's my thing with the Jazz is, if it's not this year, it's going to be if they fall short again, if they don't make at least the West Finals and really make a strong run, or they fall out before then it's going to happen this offseason. You have to. You can't run it back again with the same pieces. You're going to have to do something to at least change it up, just to give yourself a different look.
Yeah, particularly if, I mean, looking at the way that things, obviously, plenty of time for things to change, but the way the standings sit right now, you've got the Jazz are the top team of the NBA in terms of net rating, but right behind them are the Warriors. Then you've got the Suns. As it sits right now, they're playing one of those two teams in the second round, right? That's who you're going to be facing the way things are set up at the moment. That's rough. That's right, because that means you could see a second round exit for Utah as of this moment. I mean, look, as of right now, they would get the Mavericks. I would obviously favor them against the Mavs, but a round 2 exit would mean potentially bigger changes coming. So again, I think they need to be aggressive and they need to try to find something, but they also have to be careful at the same time.
Let's also look at that first round, right?
Yeah.
Because in the first round, I'm going to assume Memphis can maybe stick at 4. I think they've created enough distance.
Yeah.
I think they're playing well enough that they're going to stick at 4. So this means that if you're the Jazz, if you stick in the 3 spot, or even if they move up to the 2 spot, or maybe even the 1 spot, you're probably going to play, assuming the teams get in that we think, one of Denver, Dallas, or either of the LA teams.
Mm-hmm.
One, I don't care how poorly the Lakers have played at points of this year. No one wants to play LeBron James in a first round playoff series.
Sure.
Now, I know we all said that last year and the Suns beat them, but that was the Lakers limping, to the finish line.
And AD going down mid-series.
Exactly.
And all that. Right.
That's still a tough matchup. But then Denver, what if Denver gets Jamal Murray back? Like them what?
What if Kawhi's
Dallas,
back?
Luka? Yeah, right.
I mean,
yeah. Or if Kawhi, and Lord knows the Jazz have already had enough problems with the Clippers.
Yeah.
Even without Kawhi. Or having to go against Luka for 7 games. And look at it. I always thought about this with like the James Harden Rockets when they were trying to take down the Warriors. Why they made those series even challenges, I think, a couple times is when you have a player that can win a game or two by themselves, now all of a sudden you've got a series that you didn't expect to be in. because you win a game or two, then you have a bad shooting night, they have a good shooting night. All of a sudden, now you're in a game 7 where anything can happen. So that's my thing. If I'm the Jazz, I want to bolster this run if I can now, and maybe avoid that conversation next offseason or what do we need to do differently to get over the hump.
That makes sense. I could see them absolutely doing it. I'm looking at our time thinking we could have done 2 shows out of this, as it turns out.
Probably could have. Yeah.
Every time I almost jinxed it, Keith. Before we started, I almost said, we've got a pretty light day. I bet we knock this stuff out pretty quick. Right. But every time I think that, we wind up doing one of our longer shows. That's just what happens when we start talking basketball. Final team. And I'll be honest, I did have the Blazers on my list because that team does not look like they're enjoying playing basketball. So they were on my list, but to make it a little bit more challenging, and I know this is a team that I've talked about recently, but I think it's the Cavs. I think that they've already got to some degree, they've already considered parting ways with Collin Sexton. There's teams out there that would want him despite him being out for what we believe is going to be the season. There's teams out there that would take the chance and say, okay, we'll trade for him. We'll do what we need to do contractually, and then we'll have him after that. There's teams that will give you something. And I think the Cavs, being one of the bright spots of the season, one of the surprise teams of the season, they've got incentive to do what they need to do to make sure they stay as a playoff team. And how amazing would it be for Cleveland if they can not just make the playoffs, but have home court advantage in the first round? Like, that would be huge for them. So I do think the Cavs have all the motivation in the world to make a move, maybe using Collin Sexton's contract, maybe using some other pieces that they've got. But I see this as a team where it just makes so much sense for them to make a move.
Yeah, no, you're spot on with that. They're still sitting on, despite all of the injuries and everything else, the 4th best scoring differential in the league behind the 3 West teams that we just talked about: Utah, Golden State, and Phoenix. Then it's the Cavs, plus 5.3 points per game scoring differential. They're still sitting there, best team in the East as far as scoring differential goes. Now, it's clear not everything because they are, 5 games out of first place. Right. But that tells you that they're a pretty good team. You don't get your scoring differential that high without that. If anything, that tells us they've probably been a little unlucky. Let me look. I'm going to look at Basketball References version of this just because I'm curious.
I mean,
they are 21-16. Their expected record is 25-12.
Okay.
So yeah, that's pretty unlucky there.
Yeah, and then you figure, I mean, compared to some other, the Bulls just won 2 games on DeMar DeRozan buzzer beaters. Like that, those kind of things shift a lot in terms of how we view squads. So yeah, you're absolutely right. They're still right there at the top. And again, that it feels like it's right there for them to really solidify their spot. So I think they need to go for it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think that's a great pick. I think, and we don't need to spend a lot of time on it because we've talked about it, but they've got a lot of things that they could do. They also, as of right now, they have the easiest schedule left in the league. Too. So they've played one of the hardest schedules to this point. So they've got 2 games left against the Magic, 3 against the Pistons, 1 against the Rockets, 1 against the Pelicans, 2 against Thunder, and then 3 against the Pacers. So that's pretty good stuff if you're the Cavs. Those are all that combined with the net rating, combined with everything. I would say, yeah, this is a group, and then combined again with the fact that they haven't been very good in a number of years now. That all says to me, well, let's do it. Let's load this thing up and let's make a run.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the route that I would go here if I was them. All right. Well, I think we are setting up for, if nothing else, a pretty active trade deadline. I think there's going to be a lot of teams that have motivation to do one thing or another. But it'd be interesting to see what ultimately happens, but those are the teams that we are keeping an extra close eye on. Everybody, thanks so much for joining us. Make sure that you do subscribe right here to the NBA Front Office YouTube channel. Turn on those notifications as well. If you listen to the podcast version of this, follow us over on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. Till next time, everybody. See ya and stay safe.